This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is a partner and director at Bain Company. He is founder of the firm's global customer strategy and marketing practice. My guest, Rob Markey. Today we're going to jump into something that we all know is important, regardless of how we're applying it in our life. And this is where Rob goes in his work. The customer loyalty economy. A big picture overview. So many damn companies are so focused on earnings, they don't care about the customers. Now, when I say that, immediately think of the business, whatever that business is, that you give your money to on a regular basis in spite of them. Meaning, they get your money, but their customer service and how they treat you is shit. Yeah, you could instantly think of those companies. So when you really get under the hood, customer loyalty is an asset. It's not on the balance sheet, but it's damn important, and it has huge value. Without any further delay, without any further warm-up, let's jump right into my guest today, Rob Markey of Bain Company. In advance of this call today, Rob, I started thinking to myself, and I thought, well, some people are going to hear this example and they're going to go, whatever. I thought with your background, it would be a good place to start, and there's going to be other companies that inspire the same loyalty. But you're talking to somebody who has been using a Macintosh product since 1989. That's a little bit of a loyal customer,
I would say.
Through all the trials and tribulations, I have stuck with it. In advance of our call today, I was thinking, well, what are all the exact reasons? What does this company inspire in people? Why do they have so much loyalty? Now, before I let you answer, I want to add one thing to it today. I had posted something on Facebook about this very issue, and I said, why did people actually back in the day try to make the argument, late 80s, early 90s, that DOS was superior to a Mac OS? I thought with enough time passed that people would reflect on that and go, yeah, that was pretty silly when that used to happen. Oh my gosh, I got savaged by people that were clearly still DOS supporters. But what's so funny about it is there's no loyalty to Microsoft. Microsoft is a product you had to use. There's no real loyalty issue there. As we open this up, what is it about Apple? Going back, you pick the time, you pick the moment, you give me the analysis. What is it that inspires so much loyalty?
Well, actually, before I answer, I'm curious to hear your reasons for sticking with Apple. There have been many times along the way, I'm sure, where you had the opportunity to, or even maybe the temptation, to do something different.
No, the difference was always a Windows or DOS. Every time I would boot one of these things up, I'd want to pull all of my hair out and maybe get a gun out and just end myself right then and there. I felt like the only thing, as long as...
Because it was complicated? Because it worked differently than the way that you had become accustomed to working?
I think there was always the risk that something wasn't going to run as smoothly. I think that's probably been the root thing with Apple going back in time, is their design, the usability of the OS has always been very smooth. And perhaps, I guess there's an appreciation for the design that perhaps is emotional, maybe. I mean, I'm sure some of it is very functional, that I appreciate the good design and it works well. But I can remember some of the boot ups and watching some of the Windows boot ups and whatnot. I mean, of course, when you're comparing the Mac OS and DOS, there was no comparison. I guess once Windows got to a level, okay, yes. But then again, we're at that level today, and nobody is worked up in a lather about buying a Windows machine, but people still are juiced about Mac products.
Okay, so let's continue down this path. You sound like somebody who might have done this. Have you ever actually had a friend who you tried to convince to switch from DOS or the Microsoft world to Mac OS?
Oh, sure. Lots of smart guys back in the day. Not recently, of course. Everyone knows Apple's been very successful the last 10, 15 years. But back in the day, sure, many times, and invariably, I still remember their arguments. It was like, that's a toy, Mike. You're not serious, Mike.
Right. And what were your arguments back? Like, how did you try to convince them?
Well, you couldn't, because they were very smart. They were dug in, and they were convinced that command line that felt Unix-esque was something extra special, and they were the innards of the computer, and this graphical interface for the Mac was just cute, and that had nothing to do with real life, Mike.
And how did you feel?
I thought they were stupid.
It's almost insulting when they say that to you. It says something about you.
I don't know if I took it that way. I just thought their analysis was stupid. And I never really figured out why they had that take, other than the only thing that makes sense is if you have, let's say by the late 80s, early 90s, if you have invested 5, 6, 7 years of your life in something, you don't want to switch either.
You're part of the ecosystem. You've got software. You've got all kinds of things. Your files are stored in that format. It's hard to make a switch.
Even if there was something that perhaps could make your life easier and more interesting. It's not just an efficiency with Apple products. That's not the only issue. It's a beauty issue. They're giving you a piece of art. You're buying.
So there's something aesthetic about the experience.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
The reason I wanted to go down this path is because of exploring, before I answer, is because you've actually illustrated a number of the things that differentiate loyalty from habit or loyalty from mere repeat purchase. And I think that too often the distinction between repeat purchase or habit, or even in some cases being captive to a company, people confuse that and loyalty, because loyalty is something more. Yes, you bought successive generations of Macs, but along the way you tried to convince friends to join you. Along the way you had opportunities to join them. Along the way you probably, we didn't talk about this, but you probably encountered problems or issues or a crash or something that did not go right with your Mac, and you forgave them and found a way to kind of recover the relationship.
Especially in the early to mid 90s, when actually, let's face it, Microsoft is who they put the investment into Apple and perhaps saved Apple.
Well, and a lot of the software that presumably you use software that Microsoft produces on your Mac.
Well, I do use Word. I do use Excel. I don't necessarily know that's because of any loyalty. I think they're both, I think it's just because Microsoft and Mr. Gates have built a very nice monopoly that's worked well for a long time.
Sure, it's a standard. The reason where I'm going here is loyalty involves something more than behavior. It involves a commitment, a personal connection, an emotional connection. In some ways, a sense of identity. The iconic ads that were done with John Hodgman, where he was the PC and the cool guy was the Mac.
I'm sure all of that stuff affected me, even going back to the 1984 commercial, which I don't remember at the time, but I'm sure all of that stuff and then Jobs' attitude made you say, you know what, if I'm going to go down the train, I'm going to get on the tracks, let's follow this kind of quirky, crazy, confident guy that doesn't seem to really play by anybody else's rules.
Part of it is a sense of identity, personal identity that merged somehow with being a Mac user, or what the PC guys would call you, an Apple fanboy. And
yeah, I think today, though, I think at some stage of the game that got passed and everyone realized they were making remarkable products.
Yes.
Especially with the advent of the iPhone.
Yes, yes. And the reason this is important is because it's something more than just a good product for a good value. The reason that Apple became what it became is because they engendered a sense of advocacy among some subset of their customers, where those customers were actively recruiting others to become part of the Apple army of advocates, what we call promoters. That's something different. It's important because it has economic consequences. It's important because it is a reflection of the fact that in some way, shape, or form, Apple added so much value to your life in both tangible and intangible ways that you stuck with them through thick and thin. You continued to buy succeeding generations of their products, even though pound for pound, dollar for dollar, they were more expensive than the alternative.
And the alternative, which is interesting about your comment there, the alternative was never a true, in my mind, apples to oranges. There was always something extra with Apple that was left out of the equation. So when people said, oh my gosh, Apple's more expensive, which I actually saw someone say that today, I can never buy an Apple. It's just too expensive. And I'm thinking, well, is it the same thing?
Yeah, and it probably isn't. I heard you interview a prior guest, Joe Pine, on the topic of the Apple Store versus the Microsoft stores. One of the comments that you made was comparing the approach where Microsoft appeared to, this is from the outside, appeared to look at the Apple stores and say, clean lines, empty stores, nice tables with products on them. That's what makes that successful. And somehow, when you look at an Apple store and a Microsoft store next to each other, even today, generally the Apple store is packed with customers and the Microsoft store has more employees than customers. Interestingly, it's not because the products are necessarily technically inferior. It's because one is creating an experience and enveloping you in the culture, and the other one has a bunch of products. That was true, by the way, of the predecessor to all of these things, which was the Sony Experience Store, which was never an experience other than an overwhelming array of duplicative and unrelated products from the same company. It never actually captured what has been captured at Apple, which is you come into those stores, not only are you surrounded by cool products, but you also have opportunities to play with them, learn how they work, learn how to use them through the classes that they hold, engage with a genius in order to get something fixed, consult with somebody who has actually used the products, who can help you choose and configure the product that you want or the accessories that you want. They sell so many accessories from third parties that it's unbelievable. That's all because of the way that they've organized the experience as opposed to just the tangible, visible parts of it. It ties in with this very early experience you had many years ago that using a Mac was somehow just different. It was a deeper experience. It was more aesthetically pleasing. It was more engaging, and it was simpler. And all of those things added up to giving you the feeling, hey, this is just better. I want to stick with this.
Let me add to your Sony store thought. I was just in Tokyo a few weeks ago. I was at the Ginza flagship Sony store. I would have easily spent, I don't know what it was, $3,000 for their dog, their robotic dog that did all this stuff. I would have easily dropped the money, and the guy gave a great presentation. And here I am, I'm the flagship store, one of the priciest pieces of real estate in the world on Ginza. I say, okay, I'll buy it. And he goes, oh, but here's the problem. It can only work in the States and Japan. And I'm like, okay, I cannot believe you would make such a cool damn product that I want to give you my money, and now you're telling me I'm limited to 2 countries. And it goes right to your point.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure that there are all kinds of good reasons internally why that was the case. But at the end of the day...
Externally, what are the good external reasons for the customer? He can't buy it.
I can't come up with one.
But it probably goes to your thinking when you bring up the Sony store. And the audience is following along right now. They can say, what kind of cloudy thinking is that? You build this brilliant product that somebody wants to buy, and they can't buy the thing because they're not in one of 2 countries. Crazy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I can't give them loyalty. I want to give them loyalty. I want to buy it.
Well, this is a big issue that companies have historically, and this goes back to the way that businesses grew in the 20th century. And so it's really more of a phenomenon of the industrialized economy than it is of what happened before. But large companies grew up and they got kind of alienated from their customers. The distance between decision makers and executives and managers and product designers and the people who were actually buying and using the products became greater and greater and greater. And as a result, it became more about the product, the engineering, the people developed more and more refined and detailed technical skills, which then engaged them more often in detailed conversations with other people in their company than with customers. And as a result, they kind of lost track of what, I don't know, my grandfather, a small business owner, knew, which was he sold meat to restaurants and hotels and stuff like that. It's called a provisioner.
But he personally knew everybody.
He knew every single one of them. He knew their business. He knew the chef. He knew the guys receiving the product. He knew the manager. Let's face it, meat is a commodity on some level. Like, there's different grades of it. But at the end of the day, a steak is a steak is a steak of a certain type. He knew that this restaurant over here was always going to get the first best cuts of meat before he ran out of whatever, because they had been a loyal customer for a long time. And even when times got bad and they had to cut back, they maintained their relationship with my grandfather's business, and they made sure to pay him first, even if they were having financial difficulty. Whereas this other guy would only buy from my grandfather if his prices were the best. And so if there was a shortage of a certain type of thing, maybe he filled the order, maybe he didn't. It was a matter of understanding the relationship with each of those customers and what it was worth, and thinking forward to say, yeah, I could make an extra buck today, but maybe I should forego that extra dollar. Maybe I should extend credit to this guy, not make him pay today, so that I can keep his business 3 years from now, 5 years from now, at some point in the future when I need him more than he needs me in this moment.
You know what's so great about that grandfather example, as I was thinking about this today before our call, is if you start with your grandfather example, he has to survive. He has to, if you are a solo entrepreneur starting out and you are dealing with your first client, your second client, your 100th client, and you're not really scaling, so to speak, you have to survive. You have to, and it's like, I think figuring out loyalty is second nature to someone like your grandfather, because otherwise there's no business. It's out. He's gone. There's nothing there. I think the issue becomes, and I'm curious to hear your view here, and obviously we could talk for days about this. I think the issue for loyalty really becomes it's scaling, because how do you take all of the brilliance and the understanding and the insights that your grandfather developed for probably decades? How does he then transfer that, all of that loyalty understanding, how does he transfer that to the next person that comes in to work for him or take over the business, et cetera?
Well, and that's what's changed in the last 15 or 20 years versus when I started my career 30 some years ago. We now have the ability to capture information about individual customers and pass it along to other people through the organization. We now have the ability to get feedback from individual customers or even individual employees within a larger organization at a customer, and pass that not to the market research guys, but directly to the people who are designing the products, delivering the products, manufacturing the products, delivering the service. All of those people now have the ability to have direct access to a dialogue with individual customers to guide their thinking and help them learn how to serve them better. And because we can capture the data, we can act with memory with regard to individual customers. Even a big company can now start to operate much more like the way my grandfather did. When you add to that the skills and capabilities that some companies have developed for creating a culture in which every employee understands how they contribute to the customer experience, how they play a role in earning that customer's loyalty. And every employee has an understanding of which customers are worth more versus less and when to make investments versus to hold back. That is new. But you see companies now starting to basically act like a small business owner with regard to their customers at huge scale.
Those employees, though, also have to have, while they can have the understanding that you describe, to really get them to buy in, I guess there has to be some kind of incentive structure that's more than just a standard salary, correct?
This is an interesting thing. I'm not convinced that this is all about incentives. I think that the employees who create the most value for your company are the ones who create the most value for your customers, who are really motivated, inspired by serving customers with excellence, by making other people's lives better. And the ones who come to work only to make an extra buck, only to earn that incentive, 9 times out of 10 are not really the ones who you want hanging around for the long run. So yes, incentives should reinforce the values and the strategy and so on. But I think it's lazy management to say, you know what, we want our employees to act this way. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure them, and then we're going to put incentive pay into the comp structure so that they'll do exactly what we want on that metric. Number one, if the only employees you have who will actually behave in the right ways are the ones who are paid more for doing it, you've done a terrible job of hiring and motivating and training. But number two, it's inevitable that comp schemes that are built like that, something that it's a scheme that's often called a controlling contingent reward or controlling contingent incentive. It's inevitable that those get played with and gamed and, frankly, the better term is defrauded by smart employees who are very creative about figuring out ways to get paid more under the comp scheme without actually putting in the effort required to do it. How many times have you gone to a auto dealership, gotten your car serviced, and had the guy say, now you're going to see this survey, and I want to tell you only a 10 matters, because if you don't give us a 10, well, if you can't give us a 10, I want you to tell me now. And if you don't give us a 10, my kids aren't going to eat. That kind of, first of all, that undermines my confidence in the whole service experience. What's going on here? This is about you, not about me. Second, it's actually dishonest. Don't give an accurate report of what happened here, customer. I want you to lie for me. In legal terms, that's called fraud. You're asking me to lie for you so that you can get paid more. Heading down this path of, oh, we should pay people so that they treat their customers better, to me is one that's fraught with all kinds of issues. I'd rather create an environment where employees have the ability, they're supported in ways that allow them to create excellent experiences for their customers, to recover when things go wrong, because they always do, and to know it, to actually see customer by customer, event by event, how their actions influenced the outcome so that they can learn and improve on their own. Good employees want to do that.
Let me shift gears on you slightly. We'll be in the same headspace, but just to kind of bring in another thought. Everyone is well aware of new tech companies coming out for the last 20 years, more than 20 years, starting back with the dot-com era. Venture capital gets involved. We get an IPO, and we all know that these companies are often just about, let's get customers any way we can. We're not going to make any money. Everyone knows this. We're not going to make any money. Let's just get the customers. Let's spend somebody's money. Some rich guy over here that says, we'll give you the money to make a business. They're going to spend all that money to get the customer. They don't necessarily, everyone might say, well, we're going to be the next Amazon. Well, I'm sure we could go back and do the look through and find out a lot of companies that never got close to Amazon, obviously. How do we unpack that? Where do we go with that? I mean, because if you have a situation where everyone is just getting customers and profits are not a point, and that seems like a large part of the economy, it's messy.
It's probably a smaller part of the economy than it appears to be, but it's an important part. I think that you go back to the dot-com bubble where everybody was chasing eyeballs. You go now and it's this race to get enough customers so that you can reach scale so that then you can become profitable. The truth is that a lot of these business models are somewhat flawed, and then others are really brilliant. The ones that are flawed are the ones where there's really not a way to see a path to profitability at the individual customer level. I take ride-sharing services, and I am thankful every day for the investors who have invested in those companies and who subsidize my rides, because I'm probably paying somewhere between, $1 and $5 less per ride than it really costs the company. And the people who are bearing that cost are the investors.
Subsidize is the word, isn't it? That really is the word.
It is subsidized. I'm riding around on investor money. And I'm happy about that. And it may even be a really good strategy for the ride-sharing companies, because it may be that there is true scale economics and that it's a network effect. I mean, it's very clear. The more riders you have, the more drivers you can get. And in that business, on my own podcast, I've actually interviewed a bunch of people in that industry, and we've talked about this. The drivers are actually the bottleneck in that system. So they need more drivers. And in order to get more drivers, they need more riders. So why not subsidize the rides? I get that. But at some point, the unit economics have to be positive. You can't lose $1 on every customer and then make it up on volume. That's not how math works. Ultimately, they're going to have to charge what it costs them. And they can only do that if some combination of things has happened, which is, one, somehow they've driven out competitors and therefore can charge more. Two, they found a way to reduce the cost of new customer acquisition and maintain their growth by virtue of gaining share of each rider's rides. So more of my business goes to one of the companies versus another. Two, holding on to those customers for much longer, so there's lower churn. And then three, getting those customers so enthusiastic about the business that they're actively recruiting other customers and thereby further reducing the customer acquisition cost. I don't know whether that'll happen or not in that business, but what I do know is that unless it does, there's a limited life. Like at some point, investors are going to stop subsidizing my rides. And I think you can see that in multiple businesses, there's situations where you've got online retailers who are doing the same thing, online subscription businesses. And what you're looking for as an investor is a situation where the value of the customer base that is being built is sufficient to justify the valuation of the company. And therefore, that you can actually see a path to positive unit economics and positive lifetime value of the customer base.
So what's interesting about the example of the ride-sharing company is I'm sure I'm not an active user because I'm in a city where there's easy taxis most of the time. But loyalty for most of the ride-sharing companies, I gather by talking to folks, whether it's something like Uber or Grab, people seem pretty loyal. They seem pretty happy about their experience overall. But now you're kind of giving the dark underbelly that one day that loyalty might go up in smoke because everything might just change one day. The average person is not thinking about it like you're thinking about it. They don't know. They say, hey, I got this great app. I can get these rides. It's working well right now. But I guess it's the sustainability that they don't know about. And one day they could have a very large number of unhappy and angry loyal customers.
Yeah. And I do, again, Michael, want to distinguish between loyal and habitual. Because if you have...
As you say that, are you implying or saying that, for example, the typical person using Uber is more habitual than loyal?
I don't know because I haven't studied it in detail. But what I do observe is that the vast majority of the people that I travel with and that I watch have both Uber and Lyft and maybe some other app on their phone. They may have one that's sort of... I've done a lot of work in credit cards. In credit cards, we call it front of wallet, the first one you go to, or maybe they're primary, maybe one or the other. But if the wait is long or the price is high, they're pretty quick to check the other one.
Point well taken.
By the way, also watch your drivers and ask them which companies they drive for, because many of them, the drivers drive for multiple companies at the same time. On the same shift, they'll be like, oh, I'm available on this one and that one, and I see which one offers me a better ride or a quicker ride that's closer.
My naivete gets exposed immediately because not only are the end users not loyal, the drivers are not loyal.
If you remember, the riders are the ones who are paying. The drivers are the bottleneck. The reason that you get frustrated with a ride-sharing app is because it's going to take you too long to get a ride, and therefore you start looking for the other one. The ride-sharing companies have a huge incentive to have more people available to offer rides to their customers at any given time. So they get this density of drivers that is close to the density of riders. And that's why they have dynamic pricing and all this kind of stuff. They're playing the two sides of that marketplace.
Can every business have a real kind of loyalty component? As you described, as we're just using an example here with the ride sharing and the different issues going on, are some businesses just not conducive to finding that loyalty component that might exist in something like an Apple?
I believe that loyalty plays a bigger or a smaller role in certain industries at certain times. There's some industries where, for example, they're very large, chunky purchases that happen very, very far apart in time.
A Lexus purchase.
You're saying like an automobile.
Yeah.
Yeah. An automobile purchase can have some of that characteristic to it. One of the things that the automobile manufacturers and dealers have tried to do is create an ongoing relationship through their service business. Try to keep you in the family by giving you an amazingly good experience when you get serviced and by continually exposing you to their new product every time you come into the dealership to get serviced. If they lose you out of that service flow and you start using, say, local garage that's unaffiliated, or God forbid, you start going to a different company's dealership to get your Lexus serviced, their odds of getting you to replace your current car with the same brand drop pretty significantly.
I was a Lexus owner for 15 years. Not now, just don't have a car now, don't need one, but a Lexus owner for 15 years. And I will have to say, I did use their service every time. I really did stick with it. And perhaps I paid a premium, but I felt overall the experience from using dealerships in Northern Virginia to San Diego, I thought the experience was quite nice overall.
I would argue that Lexus was one of the big innovators in the auto industry all those years ago, creating a truly differentiated buying and service experience. I think Saturn, when it was a thing, was also a trailblazer in turning the automobile purchasing and ownership experience from transactional to relationship. That was important, and it's actually influenced a lot of other auto companies. You used that as an example. I would say maybe an even better example would be an air conditioning system, a washer, or white goods for the home, because it's less frequent that you need service. Your relationship with the manufacturer tends to be a little weaker. There are companies trying to address that, but by and large, when it's time to go buy a new appliance, people tend to go to either the installer or to an appliance store. It's almost like they're starting over again. It's like, well, what's available? What are all the different brands? What are the different levels? There's some brand loyalty, but it plays a small-ish role in that purchase. The point being, some businesses have subscription businesses, telecom, entertainment, increasingly retail, like Costco or Amazon or whatever. They have a subscription element where you actually have a relationship with the company, and when you want to stop the relationship, you have to take action to stop that relationship. Those businesses have tremendous loyalty economics. Cost of customer acquisition plays a big role in determining the value of a customer relationship. The value of a relationship is hugely determinant on how long you keep that customer, how much you are able to sell to that customer in addition to whatever they bought at first, and the extent to which they are low cost to serve and bring other customers to you. That's the business where loyalty is just completely integral to the business's economics. And I think one of the biggest problems with that is that accounting systems do not reflect the value of customer relationships. You look at an earnings statement, a P&L.
It's not there.
There's no customer there. There's products, there's business units, there's functional cost lines, but there's no customer economics there. There's nothing on the balance sheet reflecting customers, with rare exception.
Okay, go political for a second. Why has the accounting industry, there's a lot of bright people involved, clearly. Why has the accounting industry kept something like that out of the equation? Why has there not been a modernization?
Well, I think there have been a lot of attempts at doing it over the years. I've actually spent time with the Financial Accounting Standards Board governors. I've spent time with leaders at the accounting firms asking this question, trying to understand it. What I believe is there are several very good reasons why. One is that the value of a customer relationship is a modeled, projected value. How long is Michael going to remain a customer into the future? How much is Michael going to buy? What kind of pricing am I going to be able to get from him? How much is he going to cost to serve? What is the likelihood that he's going to bring in additional customers to me at very low or zero cost? All those things are projections. The starting point for it is a skepticism on the part of the chief financial officers and the finance organizations of companies, as well as accountants and auditors, skepticism about that future value.
All those points that you just brought up, if somebody wants to make an acquisition or there's a merger or there's an IPO or whatever, some venture capital investment, all those issues you brought up, somebody is doing that analysis to come up with a future idea. Otherwise,
well, this is what I didn't say is that that's an anachronistic and outdated skepticism. That is a skepticism that was absolutely valid 40 years ago. But by the 90s, certainly by the early 2000s, and at this point, as we're talking in 2020, that is completely anachronistic. I mean, fascinating to me that there are detailed standards and rules for calculating the value of stock options, which are completely projections. And there's so many factors that are completely outside the control of the company that influence the value of a stock option. The Black-Scholes model is wonderful, but it's a complete fabrication. We trust that enough to put it on the balance sheet and make companies make adjustments to earnings and keep accurate accounting for stock options. We're not willing to do the projections for customers, which are far more predictable, far less volatile. There are far fewer uncertainties. I mean, that to me is striking.
The question becomes who makes money, who keeps power or control by keeping the system as is?
Well, maybe. I think that there's another couple of things, though, which is that, and maybe this is what you were saying, there's a huge incentive, especially 20 years ago when the stock option thing became a big deal. There was a huge incentive among management teams to get this right and among investors to make sure that companies were transparent in their accounting for stock options, because there was a period in time when that was the currency that was being used in a lot of young companies, dot-com bubble era. It wasn't there at all. But what's interesting to me is that if you're valuing a company as an investor, you should have more interest in understanding unit economics and customer level lifetime value than in stock options value. There's much more certainty to it, and it's much more important. And oh, by the way, it's much harder to see. There's less transparency about that today than there is about stock options.
Top 1,000 firms in the States right now, let's say publicly traded. How many of those firms are around the boardroom, around offices, whatnot, having the very conversation about loyal customers and customer value that you are talking about and promoting right now? What are we looking at? How much of a penetration are we in terms of this is a sound new mindset for people to adopt?
So if you're saying Fortune 1000 companies, I don't have a number for you, but what I can tell you is the industries where people talk about this stuff, telecom, where customer churn, customer lifetime value, what they call ARPU, which is average revenue per user, those things are very much talked about. They're not always linked directly to investment decisions and things like that, but they're very, very important discussions. Those companies tend to create transparency for investors by disclosing them in their annual reports and their periodic financial reporting. In banking, credit cards, mortgage business, it should be a much bigger source of discussion than it is. It's probably 3 to 5% of those companies that are actively talking about it.
The banking companies you just mentioned, if I just had to say off the top of my head, their attitudes towards customers are, you are so lucky to have an account with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a mix. Different companies have different perspectives. If you're looking at USAA and Vanguard,
it depends on how much money you have with them. I mean, if you happen to have a few extra billion hanging around, like the former mayor of New York running for president right now, okay, they're going to give you a little bit better treatment if you're Mike Bloomberg, but
I think it depends on the nature of the institution you're talking about. If you're talking about USAA, Vanguard, American Express, Discover, there's a number of these companies that actively manage the value of customer relationships. They care about it and they talk about it with their investors. They absolutely make it a priority. And then there's a number of other companies, and I don't need to name them, who I think in some cases they're kind of two minds. There's a group of people within the organization who absolutely understand the value of customer relationships. And then there's another group of people who are like, yeah, whatever. I've got earnings to deliver. I don't really care that much. Push comes to shove. I'm going to shut down parts of my service operations. I'm going to increase the fees that I charge people. They behave the way you're describing, I think in part because there's so little transparency to their investors about the value that they're creating or destroying in their customer base. What I'd like to see, and what I've been arguing for with the Financial Accounting Standards Board, with the accounting industry, with CFOs, is we should create more clarity in disclosure around customer metrics so that investors get past all the BS of trying to get the companies to put the value of their customer relationships on their balance sheet. I think that the easier path is to simply require companies to provide visibility into how many customers did they acquire, how many do they have, how many are active versus inactive, how much are they spending with us, how much does it cost to acquire new customers, the kinds of things that drive customer lifetime value and that therefore give you insight into the value of a company's customer base need to be consistently, reliably reported so that then investors can hold management teams accountable and management teams will start to pay attention to not just this quarter's earnings pressure, but also the effect that taking, say, an increase in fees will have on the long-term value of the customer relationship.
As we wind down, I have to say, I just really like the emphasis of where you are going. Just the one word, loyalty, is such a nice word. It's right there with the synonym of trust, perhaps, but loyalty, trust, these are such great thoughts. I think if someone hears the word loyalty, you feel good. Okay, I like being loyal. I want people to be loyal to me. All levels of our lives. Loyalty is just if you have loyalty, you have a better life. If you don't have loyalty, you have chaos.
I think that if you pull back even from the concept of loyalty and you just think about how you earn loyalty, how do you earn loyalty? You earn loyalty by making somebody's life just a little bit better and doing it consistently enough and reliably enough that they develop trust in you.
Back to your grandfather.
Yeah, if companies behaved in ways that merited their customers and their employees' loyalty, this sounds highfalutin, but the world would be a better place. Your life would be better because the companies that you're dealing with would not be out to screw you all the time, but instead you would be able to trust by doing the right thing for their shareholders, they're also doing the right thing for you to make your life better so that you are willing, you're happy to continue to be a customer, to pay for that value, and to tell other people about it. That to me is where I would like to see us take our community of companies. And if we did, then honestly, a lot of the regulation that companies hate, that basically is meant to protect consumers, not all of it, but a lot of it would become irrelevant because companies acting in their best interest would be adding value for customers in a consistent way.
I love a line that you use. You say, give your customers stories they can tell their friends and growth will take off. There you go. I mean, that's loyalty right there. If the customer is going to tell their friends something, that says you've got a loyal customer. And if you get one of these loyal customers, and people really need to really think about, what does it mean? Okay, now you've got a loyal customer. What is the potential economic advantage to having that loyal customer beyond what they might spend with you or work with you on something? It's going to be how they speak about you as well.
Absolutely. The temptation of some of they call themselves hard-nosed accounting or finance guys, is to say, well, I got this loyal customer. Let me exploit that loyalty for my shareholders. That temptation is great and often misguided. You look at a company like Vanguard, their best deals, the best treatment, the best value goes to their longest tenured, most loyal customers, not to the brand new people who come in the door. And still, Vanguard is outgrowing the entire rest of the industry, much of which is built on giving great deals to the newest customers. That's a good example of how doing good for your most loyal customers accrues to your benefit as a company while also creating a better value for customers.
The loyalty economy. Everyone should check your writing out, check the piece out. Harvard Business Review, correct?
That is it. Harvard Business Review, January, February 2020.
Rob, where can we send people beyond checking the piece out? Where is there a Twitter handle, a website you'd like to direct them to? Bain, where would you like to send them to?
There's two things that I would suggest. One is I occasionally use Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm RG Markey on Twitter. You can find me easily on LinkedIn. But at bain.com/loyalty, you can find a lot of the material that we have written about, a lot of the topics we've covered here. There's a podcast where we talk about these issues with people who are actively practicing them in their businesses. And there are even some tools that you can use to start to put some of the concepts to work.
Rob, cool stuff. I got to tell you, I'm sure you guys have heard it at Bain ever since The Dark Knight and whatnot. But I hear the word Bain and all I can think of is I can hear that voice. I can hear that voice in my head, you know.
Yeah, well, I think our goal is to actually behave a little better than he did.
Well, yes, I know that.
Bain Company was founded by a guy named Bill Bain in 1973, who was a brilliant,
a touch before the film,
thoughtful strategist. I really am proud of the firm that we've been able to build here.
Rob, I appreciate you coming on. Please keep me posted on your future work. I enjoyed the conversation.
It was really fun. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.